Hey everyone, how are you? I hope you're all doing okay. I know January is an extremely difficult month for a lot of us. I've personally been finding things quite tough just coming into the new year. I think there's a lot of pressure around New Year's resolutions, that kind of new year, new me. So just wanted to come on and check in with you all and see if you're doing okay. One thing I've been asked a lot lately has been, what are eating disorders? And this is actually a really difficult question to answer. I think regardless of how much experience you have working with eating disorders, working in an area where you're coming into contact with people with eating disorders a lot, it's really, really difficult. But eating disorders manifest in a significant disturbance in the person's thinking and relationship to food, weight and shape. They can have potentially life-threatening complications, especially with anorexia. It has the highest mortality rate amongst all the psychiatric illnesses. So it's estimated that 1.25 million people in the UK are affected by an eating disorder, with approximately 18,000 to 20,000 individuals living with an eating disorder in Northern Ireland at any one time. There are a lot of misconceptions around eating disorders, and people often think about the physical elements of it, but eating disorders are not primarily about the food. While they manifest in the person's thinking and behaviours around food, weight and shape, eating disorders are fundamentally a coping mechanism that the person has developed to manage their feelings and emotions. They're most definitely not something that someone chooses to develop, but rather eating disorders develop for a range of various and complex reasons. I've personally struggled with an eating disorder, and while I've never received a diagnosis, I've by no means struggled. And when I was 11 or 12, I stopped eating. I lost a dramatic amount of weight in a very short space of time. I was eating very, very, very small amounts of food. But my most recent experience, about 4 years ago, I started really struggling with binge eating. A lot of people were commenting that I had put on weight, that my clothes no longer fitted me, that my school uniform was getting very, very tight, and it was very difficult to explain to somebody that I just couldn't stop eating. That was really tough. I think there's a lack of understanding with eating disorders, but there's a lot of stigma around binge eating disorder, I find, and people were like, what do you mean you can't stop eating? And it was really, really hard. I was eating huge amounts of food in such a short space of time, and I was gaining weight really rapidly, and it was really impacting my mood. I was really, really anxious. I was very low mood. I entered into a very dark depression, and it was during this time that I actually tried to take my own life. So eating disorders are really serious, but they're not primarily about the food. There were so many things that it was impacting. For example, my social life. I didn't really want to go out at all because of this. It was impacting my studies as well, impacting my mood, my relationship with other people's. And eating disorders don't discriminate along any lines. Anyone can develop an eating disorder. So often I hear, eating disorders, is that not what impacts teenage girls? Of course it impacts teenage girls, but it impacts so many other people as well. I've had young people reaching out for support. I've had parents concerned about children as young as 4, 5 and 6, which has been really worrying. I've had people of all ages. I've worked right through with parents concerned about 4, 5, 6-year-olds up to people in their 70s struggling with an eating disorder, and there will be people beyond 70 who struggle with an eating disorder too, because eating disorders really don't discriminate at all. It doesn't matter about your sexual orientation, doesn't matter about your race, your socioeconomic status, ethnicity, personality, age, regardless of what it is. Eating disorders do not discriminate, and we really need to get that into our minds that anyone can develop an eating disorder at any time. Eating disorders are highly complex psychological illnesses that can develop as a consequence of many different reasons, And when I look back in my own life, there's probably a wealth of reasons as to why I developed an eating disorder. Childhood trauma being one of them, adverse childhood experiences, very perfectionist personality as well. Personality can definitely impact things. Well, it's not going to be a sole cause, it can definitely impact things because it can impact your outlook on the world as well, and as eating disorders fundamentally become a coping mechanism as well. So if you're constantly striving for the perfection, it's an unrealistic goal, and ultimately that is going to have an impact on your mood and anxiety and all sorts of things. And that for me, I've always been a high achiever, I've always been a high flyer, I've always wanted top grades, and I've always pushed myself to the absolute limit. I've always pushed myself to the absolute maximum, and ultimately that takes its toll. And I started binge eating to try and cope with a lot of these overwhelming feelings as well. There are many different factors that interact and contribute to someone developing an eating disorder, and quite often I hear parents say, quite sadly, it's our fault that my daughter or my son has developed an eating disorder, and that is not true. Of course, our backgrounds, our upbringings, our circumstances, these can all interact with each other, these can all contribute, but it is never anyone's fault. And I just want you to remember that. If you're caring for someone with an eating disorder, if you know someone with an eating disorder, it is not your fault, and nor is it their fault either. So they arise due to a complex interaction between biological, psychological and social factors, and indeed what triggers an eating disorder for one person can be very different to what triggers the development of an eating disorder for another. And this is the thing about trauma. I very much believe that eating disorders are rooted in trauma. And trauma is not the event itself, it's what happens within us in relation to that event. So, one person who is being bullied, it could make them a little bit anxious, it could make them a bit weary of those people, but for someone else, it could completely take over their life. For me, I have a very sensitive personality, so one comment about my weight or whatever it might be can really knock me for days, weeks, months, years, and sometimes my mind will keep on playing over and over the same thing that somebody has said to me, where someone else could shrug that off. So it's really important to understand that this question, while it seems very simplistic, it's actually really complex, because what impacts one person may not impact another person, and that's really important to understand. We are all different, and it's really important to treat people uniquely as well, because different treatments work for different people, and that's really important to understand. I'm going to go into the different eating disorders as well. So, more commonly you probably know about anorexia. It's a complex but treatable mental health condition. It's characterised by a persistent restriction of food intake, leading to a lower than typical body weight for the person's age and height. Sometimes the person will lose a considerable amount of weight over a short period of time. An intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat, even if the person is underweight or malnourished, which interferes with their ability to maintain their body's healthy weight. A disturbed perception of weight, size and appearance. Body weight and size will have an extreme influence on how someone views themselves, and there will often be a lack of recognition of the seriousness of the situation. I've had a lot of service users with anorexia who haven't noticed that they've been unwell, or they'll come in and they'll say, Katie, my family and friends have noticed that I'm very unwell at the minute, but I don't really understand what they mean, and that's very, very common. So if you're struggling with anorexia, you may physically experience low body weight or sudden weight loss, feeling cold all the time, tired and weak, difficulty sleeping, bloating, constipation, irregular or absent periods. You may think and feel different things. You may have intrusive thoughts about weight, size and food, and extreme fear of becoming fat. You may have a distorted body image as well, low self-confidence and self-esteem. that was something that I really struggled with. Anxiety, especially around meals, feeling overwhelmed, high levels of perfectionism, again, that was something that I experienced too. Irritability and mood disturbance, difficulty concentrating and forgetfulness. Those last few bullet points were all things that I really, really struggled with. If you have anorexia, you may also engage in the following behaviours: restricting food intake, rituals and rules around food, preparing food for others as well. That's something very common in people with anorexia, that they will care for others a lot. They'll constantly be preparing food for family and friends, but not looking after themselves. Taking a long time to eat or eating in secret, compulsively checking the body for weight gain, over-exercising, again, exercising when really, really sick or in poor weather. I've had that a lot with service users, that they've been very sick and they've been very run down, but yet they've forced themselves to go out for a run, and they've been compulsively exercising to try and lose weight too. And avoiding social functions that involve food. And it's really important to remember that eating disorders impact all areas of our lives. It's not just the physical component of it, it can completely impact our social lives as well. I want to move on to binge eating disorder next. That is the eating disorder that I primarily struggled with. So binge eating disorder is a serious psychological illness which is characterised by the person eating large quantities of food, much more than would be considered normal, on a regular basis and over a short period of time. So again, eating disorders don't discriminate. Binge eating disorder can affect anyone regardless of age, gender and background. People with binge eating disorder often describe how they feel a sense of being out of control when they engage in a binge, where they simply cannot stop it. They often describe a feeling of not really being present during a binge, and at times are unable to recall what they've actually eaten. And I know that was something that I experienced a lot. I was able to eat really large quantities of food, but right after the binge, I wasn't able to recall what I'd eaten either. It's not uncommon for binges to be pre-planned either. In public, the person may maintain a persona of normal eating, hence making the illness difficult to detect. The difference between bulimia and binge eating disorder will actually be explained later, and I will let you know the differences of that. Like the other eating disorders, binge eating disorder is not primarily about food, weight and shape. Beneath the surface and the outward manifestation of the illness lies a person who is greatly struggling with their world. It is fundamentally a coping mechanism for dealing with emotions and feelings. And I know when I was personally really struggling with anxiety and depression, I used binge eating to really cope with those very complex feelings as well. Behavioural signs of binge eating disorder: eating large quantities of food in a short space of time, even when not hungry. But it's important to note that this often happens when someone is alone and in secret too. Hoarding food, eating rapidly during the binge, eating until uncomfortably full, social withdrawal, irritability. Irritability was a huge one for me. Psychological signs: feelings of guilt and shame, again low self-esteem and confidence, dissatisfaction with the body. Other mental illnesses, again, such as depression and anxiety, are really, really common. And spending large amounts of time thinking about food too. Physical signs of binge eating disorder: constipation, bloating, weight gain, poor skin condition as well, and breathlessness. Definitely my skin was impacted during that time. I would have quite bad acne anyway, and that really, really impacted me. Whenever I was binge eating, my acne was a lot worse. So, bulimia. Again, another very serious psychological illness, which is characterised by the person feeling trapped in a cycle of dieting, binging, again, just to recap, that's eating large quantities of food in a short space of time, and then engaging in compensatory behaviours known as purging. So, a lot of people think that purging is just self-induced vomiting, but it's not. It can be things like laxative abuse as well. And bulimia, again, can impact anyone regardless of age, gender and background. Episodes of binging are extremely distressing for the person, as they can feel very out of control. And people affected by bulimia often describe how they feel very disconnected during a binge episode, which creates even more distress afterwards. And it is these feelings and a sense of failure following a binge that can then lead to the compensatory behaviours. Recovery is definitely not a linear process, and there could be many bumps, twists and turns on the way. Similar to the other eating disorders, bulimia impacts upon all areas of the person's life. It's an extremely distressing and isolating illness, and due to the secrecy associated with the eating disorders in general, and the fact that many people with bulimia may maintain a normal body weight, detecting the illness can actually be very difficult, leading to the illness going untreated for a very long time. Again, bulimia is fundamentally a coping mechanism too. Here are some behavioural signs to look out for though. Eating large amounts of food, binging, self-induced vomiting after eating, laxative abuse, over-exercise, body checking, weighing themselves frequently, hoarding food, secrecy and denial of behaviours around food too, mood swings and irritability, social isolation, and sometimes misuse of alcohol. There are many psychological signs of bulimia nervosa as well. Obsessive thinking and preoccupation around their weight, shape and size, anxiety around meal times, intense fear of gaining weight, distorted body image, low self-esteem, low confidence, social isolation, feelings of guilt and shame, and other mental illnesses such as depression and anxiety. Physical signs of bulimia: tiredness and difficulty sleeping, digestive problems, irregular periods in females, erosion of tooth enamel, electrolyte disturbance, frequent changes in weight, poor skin condition, even calluses on the hand too. These are the most common eating disorders, but there are other feeding and eating disorders that some people aren't aware of. So, first of all, we have other specified feeding or eating disorders, formerly known as ethnicities. These are serious psychological illnesses which impact greatly in all aspects of a person's life. Examples of this include atypical anorexia, bulimia nervosa of low frequency and or limited duration, binge eating disorder, again of low frequency and or limited duration, purging disorder, so this is when someone purges to affect their weight but not in the context of a binge purge cycle, and night eating syndrome as well. Someone experiences reoccurring episodes of night eating. It's very important to note that OSFED is just as serious an illness as the other eating disorders as well, and I'd highly recommend that you contact your local GP if you're experiencing any of these eating disorders. I think sometimes the other specified feeding and eating disorders are often overlooked, and it's really, really important that these are taken just as seriously. There's another quite common eating disorder called ARFID, so that's Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. So it's a relatively new diagnostic category, and it's characterised by an eating or feeding disturbance. This can look like an apparent lack of interest in eating or food, avoidance based on the sensory characteristics of food, or concern about aversive consequences of eating, whether that's choking or vomiting. This leads to a persistent failure to meet appropriate nutritional and or energy needs. This can result in weight loss, nutritional deficiency, or a dependence on nutritional supplements. There is no evidence of body image disturbance, however. The eating disturbance is not attributable to a lack of food, cultural practice, physical illness, or other mental health condition. Although many children go through phases of picky or selective eating, a person with avoidant restrictive food intake disorder does not consume enough calories to grow and develop properly, and in adults to maintain basic body function. Individuals with autism spectrum conditions, ADHD, and intellectual disabilities are much more likely to develop ARFID. So, warning signs and symptoms of ARFID: dramatic restriction in types or amount of food eaten. They will only eat certain textures of food, fears of choking or vomiting, a lack of appetite or interest in food, limited range of preferred foods that becomes much narrower over time. I've had many service users who have come to me who have been struggling with avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and they maybe only have 2 or 3 different foods that they will eat, and that's inclusive of the 3 meals in the day. So you can imagine the difficulties that they are up against then if they're constantly trying to think of a combination of these 3 different foods to ensure that they get the nutrients. It can lead to sleep problems, feeling cold all the time as well, muscle weakness, and impaired immune functioning too. Quite often people with ARFID will have stomach cramps, constipation, acid reflux, and be more prone to illness as well. Again, it's really important that you contact your doctor if you think that you're struggling with an eating disorder. There are also many charities that will help you with an eating disorder. You can just simply type into Google eating disorders and then whatever country you're in. So there's eating disorders in Northern Ireland, there's Beat UK, so that looks at eating disorders across the United Kingdom. There's Links Counselling as well in Northern Ireland, Action Mental Health in Northern Ireland. So please reach out for support if you feel you're struggling with an eating disorder. There are so many myths and misconceptions that exist around eating disorders. Eating disorders are not a choice. I so often hear people say to me, well, why can't they just stop it? But no one chooses to develop an eating disorder, just like nobody chooses to develop diabetes, or no one chooses to develop anxiety or depression. Nobody chooses to develop an eating disorder. Eating disorders are not a choice. Again, the myth is that only females develop eating disorders. This is not true. Anyone can develop an eating disorder regardless of gender. Men can and do develop eating disorders, and there have been many men who have helped over the past year and a half or so. I've had men who are doctors, I've had men working in health and social care, in the business sector, I have men actually working in the health and wellness industry as well. I've had personal trainers in as well. So eating disorders really don't discriminate across any lines at all. Another myth is that you must be really thin to have an eating disorder. I definitely debunked this myth when I was struggling with binge eating disorder. Eating disorders are serious psychological illnesses which cannot be fully assessed on objective measures such as weight and shape. Eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes, and you can't tell by looking at someone whether or not they have an eating disorder. And I hate this. I hate when people are constantly making comments on people's body image. It's not nice at all, and so many of us, whether we have an eating disorder or not, are sensitive about our weight and our shape and our size. So please be really sensitive about this. Many people who may appear to be within a normal weight range can actually be seriously struggling with a very serious eating disorder. And I've had this time and time again, service users coming through the door. They're within what the GP deems a normal weight range, but they're really, really struggling with their mental health. They're maybe off work at the minute because they can't cope with getting into work. They're maybe not going out to their social clubs, they're not seeing their friends, they're anxious, they're having panic attacks, they're on antidepressants. So it's really, really important to look beyond somebody's shape and size when it comes to eating disorders. Again, another myth is that eating disorders are just a phase, and I often hear people say, oh sure, they'll grow out of it. That is not true. Early intervention and support is vital and greatly improves prognosis of the illness. If you suspect you have an eating disorder, or you suspect a loved one has an eating disorder, please seek help now. Eating disorders do not just go away. There's a brilliant website, it's called findahelpline.com, and it's all different helplines all across the world. You'll be able to find something for your country. It's really, really important that you do reach out, and even if that charity or that organisation doesn't directly deal with eating disorders, they will be able to signpost you, or simply send a message to Positivity Only. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, so please just send a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Another myth is that eating disorders are a diet. They are most definitely not a diet. They're a serious psychological illness that requires early intervention and support. And again, eating disorders are a teenage illness. While evidence indicates that adolescence is an extremely vulnerable stage for the development of an eating disorder, eating disorders can and do develop at any age. Just going back to what I was saying earlier, I've had parents raising concerns about children as young as 4, 5 and 6. That's very common. And I've also had people, I've been working with people in their 60s, their 70s with an eating disorder, and I'm sure there are many people beyond the age of 70 struggling with an eating disorder. So they don't just go away. And the final myth is that recovery is rare. People can and do recover from eating disorders. Again, I always just go back to my personal journey, because I believe that I'm a walking living example of this. And I don't think you can fully believe something until you see it for yourself. So yeah, for me, it's been well over 4 years now. The last binge eating I experienced was June of my A-levels, so I've done an undergraduate degree, the first year of my master's, I'm into my second year of my master's. And don't get me wrong, I've had urges, and this Christmas I was actually very close to having a binge again, and I didn't. I was able to use lots of my different coping mechanisms, havening, the tapping I've learned, journaling, drumming, talking to family and friends, listening to music, going out for a walk, and I didn't end up binging, which was absolutely amazing. But for me, people can and do recover from eating disorders, and it's really important to acknowledge that too. So there's lots of different organisations that you can reach out to for support. There's Links Counselling, Beat UK, Action Mental Health, Eating Disorders Association Northern Ireland, Bodywise, that's Ireland as well. There are so many different charities and organisations, and as I find out more across the world, I will continue to post them in the comments here, so that you will be able to find lots of different signposting materials as well, so you can get care and support. Also, Cause Carers Northern Ireland, they support families, friends and carers. If you're supporting someone with an eating disorder, they are very, very good as well. So I'm going to sign out now and let you all enjoy your evening, but I really hope that you enjoyed this video on eating disorders, and I will continue to share more resources. Take care, bye.